On this episode of the show, I have with me Berit Hoffmann. She is CEO and co-founder at Korl. We're going to be talking about, well, being a founder a little bit later in life, and we're going to talk to her about why she made the decision to start a company and be a founder. And obviously, we'll talk about her background, which is phenomenal, worked for great companies, and could probably have had any job she wanted, but decided that being a CEO at a startup was the right choice. She's gone through some fundraising with all the AI competition out there, and she did a lot of that being 7 months pregnant. We'll talk to her about just the process of fundraising and hopefully a few other things. Berit, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. Before we start, can you tell us what the company does?
Absolutely. So Korl is, of course, an AI platform, but we help customer-facing teams really translate and put together kind of the narratives, talk tracks, and actually the presentations that they can bring to their customers to help really translate the value of what their product does. And so whether that's roadmap, decks, QBRs, EBRs, renewal conversations. And what's unique about our approach is we are really, as compared to maybe some other AI presentation tools, we are really plugging into a lot of the existing context of your business data, your Jira, your Google Docs, your Figma, your Salesforce, and also taking in all your branding to be able to deliver output that is, really highly accurate and true to the business use case that you're trying to solve.
Awesome. Well, definitely an interesting space. I probably could do a whole episode on that, but obviously we're going to talk a little bit about your journey story, a little bit of your founder story. So you started your company a little bit later in life, I guess. Just to kind of touch on that. When you started your company, you already had a fantastic work history, and somebody can go on LinkedIn, and if they want, I don't do whole bios, but they can go and look at your bio. But just a snapshot, you were at Google, at Dell, at other companies in between, Yale, Stanford. I mean, with all that background, you probably, as we mentioned, could have grabbed any job you wanted on the market, but you decided being a startup founder was the right move. What was the thoughts behind that? What made you want to do that?
Yeah, well, I had always kind of had a bit of a bug in my ear or an itch to thinking about starting something. And I actually, while I was in grad school, was really thinking about when do I want to start a company? Do I want to start a company? And that was what prompted me to join a very early stage company at the time, Bebop, which was founded and led by a woman, Diane Green, who was the co-founder and CEO of VMware. So really, really fascinating experience. And I've been very fortunate. She's been a mentor to me. But kind of the hypothesis with that decision to join was, hey, let me join something really early, see what it's like, and kind of validate or invalidate whether I think entrepreneurship is a path for me. And that then kind of blossomed into, we were acquired by Google a few years later. I spent 4 years at Google. And again, after Google, I thought about, is now the right time to start a company? But I ended up joining something early again. Both of those decisions, I think, for me, there were still things I wanted to learn. I felt like I hadn't really taken a product from 0 to 1 and launched it before. I got to do that at Bebop and Google. With joining Sisu, the data analytics company I joined to lead product and design there, I hadn't really, because I kind of came into product leadership while I was at Bebop and Google, so I hadn't really established and built the team from scratch. And so what did it look like to have to recruit and convince people to join something early and get them excited about it? So again, for me, it was along the way, what are the lessons? What are the experiences, and who are the people that I want to meet that are going to set me up to, if I do decide to start a company, know that I've got some of those skill sets and I've got the network that I want to leverage to do that. I think so that's kind of like, why not right away? I think the other side of it is, well, why not maybe later once, I think my first kid was 6 months old when I decided to start the company. And as I think you mentioned in the intro, I have since had my second kid. So it's a bit of a crazy time in some ways to say, let me also have a little startup baby in the middle of all that. But I think for me, it was once you have kids, I think it puts it's a nice sharpening lens on like, I better really enjoy what I'm doing. I better be really excited for professionally, right? What I'm doing at work, I'm spending a lot of time there. I'm spending a lot of mind share there. I better really enjoy it. I better feel passionate about it. And I wanted to make sure I was doing it with the people I wanted to do it with. And so actually starting the company was a way to ensure that I have absolutely loved building the team and doing it with my co-founder. And um, I think I kind of got to a point where I said, if I don't do it now, I'm going to regret it, and who knows if I'll do it later. So dove in with both feet.
Interesting. I love that. And we'll unpack a little bit of that because I feel like there's a lot there. So you mentioned obviously starting a little bit later, wanting to get that experience under your belt, and I think that's interesting because I do speak to a lot of founders who leverage the fact that they don't have that work experience, which I think is maybe even more typical, right? The typical fresher, younger, out of school, dives headlong and figures it out. I do see less experienced people at work. I'm assuming, some of it's family obligations, some of it's you build up income and you don't want to take that risk of, losing that. I'm sure you held very well-regarded jobs in all those cases. When we look at that, and obviously we'll put aside the fact that you were just also a new mom with and another. We'll put that aside for a second. But when you look at that, when you had to make that decision, were those I mean, you overcame it. Obviously, you did it. But how big of a factor were those for you?
I mean, they're absolutely factors, right? Because I think there's a little bit of a, I think there is some truth in the belief, I guess, or kind of the narrative that really to do a company, you have to be all in, all consuming. Like there is no work life balance, right? It's kind of figuring out how to navigate the company and live and eat and breathe that every day. And so there is a little bit of fear around, can I do that while also being at this stage where maybe I'm not 23 and can pull all-nighters and or so I think there's a little bit of fear in that for sure. There's also a little bit of, like you said, a little bit more what you're walking away from. Um, and there's probably a bit more opportunity cost because I definitely thought about if you're 23 and you take a year to try to start something, everyone looks at it as, well, you tried and that's a good experience. If you effectively step out of kind of the workforce to go, not step out of the workforce, but if you effectively step out of kind of the progression that you're pursuing at established companies and you say, I'm going to go take a big risk and pursue a path where, let's face it, 99 plus percent of companies fail or whatever the stat is, you're very aware. You're acutely aware of what you're walking away from, both financially, but also just what will it look like if at some point I want to re-enter the more established path. So those things were absolutely factors. What I did when I was toying with the idea of starting a company was I actually interviewed for jobs at the same time. And because what I didn't want to do was say, oh, I just decided to do it because it was the option in front of me. I wanted to say, let me put all the options in front of me and see what I get really excited about. And so that was very telling for me when I was talking to companies about joining in kind of more product leadership roles at these growth stage companies. When those options were still there on the table in front of me, but I found my mind share and my excitement and my energy going towards what I was exploring for starting a company, that was very telling for me. So, again, all of the fears are definitely there. You're more aware of it in some ways. I think it can make it a little harder to make the leap because you're more aware of how likely it is to fail. You're more aware of what you're giving up. But again, what it came down to for me was uh, my energy and excitement were pulling me in the direction of starting something. It was the right timing with my co-founder, who's someone that I've known for over a decade. We've worked together for the better part of that. Um, and, candidly, I also felt like I've got young kids. I want them to see and know that it's okay to take a risk. And I want them to, I'm certainly going to regret it if I haven't done this. And so, like I said, kind of now's the time. If I don't do it now, when?
I mean, that's a fair question. I think a lot of times people do look back at those decisions, and obviously there is that regret component, especially if you know it's something you want to do. When you're looking at the experiences that you carried forward, obviously you have management, leadership, all those different things. And you'd been to a couple startups to see some of the, some of those nuances of how startups execute. When you were starting your own business and you're looking at what are those intangibles that you're going to pull from to help you get going, because when you start day one, there isn't really anything there. Like it's different when you go to any company that has even just a little bit, you at least have something to grasp onto. When you go and you're like, my inbox is actually at zero. This domain literally has no emails. This is the only, you have to really draw on some of those experiences. I guess what did you draw on?
Yeah, there were a couple things. One was I had been I had been in some experiences where I felt like we were a little bit of at times felt like a technology in search of a problem. That was a big lesson for me. So I spent probably the first 9 months of starting this company we didn't write a single line of code. We just talked to people and honestly killed a lot of ideas before we ever built them. So that was maybe one lesson. It was be very crisp on the problem you're solving. And, I think some people talk about this, which I really like, is fall in love with the problem, not the solution.
Hmm.
And so that was a big piece of it up front that I think I carried from prior experiences was I wanted to have real clarity around what's a big, meaty problem and, how exactly we solve that or even what the flavor is of like, what's the first use case? Because when I say problem, I mean like big vision for the company. Clearly we've pivoted around exactly what use case and exactly what target, customer are we going after first. But the problem has stayed very consistent, which is, in our case, it happens to be that there's a lot of kind of functionally siloed data that is very historically very manual and hard to pull together and put together these kind of narratives and nice consumable artifacts to build alignment, whether that's building alignment with your customers, whether that's building internally. So that problem has stayed very consistent. Once we kind of landed on that, that has stayed consistent. And that's been a big lesson from that I took with me. I think the other thing is, and people say this, but it's one thing to say it, it's a different thing to live it. There's going to be down days. And I came in like very prepared that there's, because when you join something early, you get to feel that a little bit. And certainly when it's yours and you're a founder, you feel it to a greater order of magnitude. But I've kind of experienced there's going to be days where you're going to think you're onto something amazing and you're changing the world. And then there's going to be days where you're going to be like, what am I doing? Should I be here? Is this the right thing? And so much of it is just powering through those moments of doubt. And I'd experienced that because I'd lived that and then, gone on to have, fortunately, to have an acquisition and kind of build and launch a couple products at Google. And then, I'd also seen that when your reaction to that doubt is a lot of changing of strategy or kind of like being super reactive or flailing in the direction of the company, I've seen the impact that has on the team. So that was kind of something where it was like, come in knowing there's going to be some downs, there's going to be some moments of doubt and some questions, and you better be ready to kind of go to the like deep truths at that moment, which are why am I doing this? Why am I excited about it? And what's that core problem that we're solving?
Absolutely. It may be a question. I did want to touch on fundraising. We will get into obviously doing it while you're pregnant because I think that's something most people don't understand how the complexity, additional complexity to an already difficult part of the process. So obviously, since you guys have started, AI in the last couple of years has gotten massive amounts of funding, tons of rotation of from all venture capital is going into AI. Now we're seeing robotics. It is a different time to raise funding versus if you were AI 4 or 5 years ago, you'd be having different conversations, maybe pulling at different strings to convince people that your solution is viable. I love to hear about your experience going through fundraising, having an AI startup. Love to hear it.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things. One is it's interesting. In some ways, I almost feel like we're transitioning in a way to I saw someone say this. I thought it was an interesting way of saying it. We're going to get to a point at which we're going to stop saying AI because everything's going to leverage or incorporate AI. So just in the same way, we got to a point where we didn't say like as often, oh, we're a SaaS company or we're a cloud company. It was kind of just, yes, we leverage cloud and SaaS as a way to deliver the software. So I think I mentioned that just to say, like, in some ways, you can almost bucket everything into AI these days, anyway, or a lot of things. And that was something that, how that relates maybe to what impact that had on fundraising is there was, I think, a very difficult tension that we tried to be intentional about, which was like, how much do you lean into using that the hype and the buzzwords and the talking about the AI versus how much do you lean into like here's some just core workflow problems that we're solving or here's some really tricky like data messiness problems that yeah some of it has AI as a solution but some of it has good old business logic and kind of how to I guess how upfront to be. It was almost like you couldn't start a meeting with a VC without having AI on the first slide. But how quickly do you want to kind of unpack and get very real and tangible and beyond the buzzwords to start parceling out like where are we leveraging AI? How are we leveraging it? Where are we not leveraging it? Because I think, especially when we were fundraising, but still so, we're at a point where there's more promise uh, than sometimes reality hits, where it's you need to talk about this stuff, but in reality, there's a lot of kind of patchwork and duct tape and whatnot in the back end. So that was one thing. I think the second thing is just that I think we've gone through waves of there being a lot of excitement around fundraising and then a lot of like, oh, we've deployed a lot of capital towards AI startups. We got to see how some of those pan out. Like, let's pull it back. And so it's almost like you're seeing these little micro surges and kind of pullback moments. And that was just interesting. I think we happened to fundraise at a little bit of a pullback moment, still kind of on the upward trend, but a little bit of like the last 2 quarters before we fundraised had been like the most capital deployed in, I don't know, some statistic. It was a lot, right? There had a lot of money had just gone into AI and there was a little bit of like, wait, are all of these just wrappers on LLMs and they're all going to go to zero? And so there's kind of this tightening and it's just an interesting dynamic that because AI is moving so quickly and because realistically nobody knows what exactly the future looks like in a way more existential way than I think has ever been true of any prior technology shifts. I think there's a lot more of these kind of micro reactions of, again, you have these moments of excitement and these moments of, ooh, like let's pull it back in. And it's just an interesting like psychological dynamic to see where are you hitting people in each of those conversations in their moment of, are we overinvested? Are we underinvested? And what exactly does the future look like?
Hmm. Interesting. I think the expectation, well, obviously you have to have AI on every tech. I think that's probably one everyone would definitely agree with. And where you're taking your solution in comparison to the actual foundational models incorporating further and further features. It's got to be an interesting time as an AI founder, and I've asked this question a couple of times, is it's got to be one of those where you're thinking, well, what if they put out a feature that absorbs absolutely what we do and then that's it? That's a risk you take with anything, but I am curious, like when you think about your startup, does that keep you awake? Is that hopefully it doesn't keep you awake, but is it something that you think about? Is it something that you're concerned with? Or listen, execution above all else, you don't worry about the stuff you can't control.
I think it's yes to all of those, right? So
Yes.
you definitely have the moments where, yeah, every new announcement or release that comes from these big, kind of model companies, you have a moment of, well, what does that mean? And I wouldn't say it's not always, are they going to do exactly what we're doing? It's more what I found to be true, and I think actually important, is to say, does this change anything about what our strategy is and how we're thinking about that strategy and what we think our moat is? Because I just think the pace at which moats come and go is very fast right now. The pace at which, nothing stays standing still. The pace of the models, obviously, what they can do, what is possible, what's not possible changes. It's you almost have to reconvince yourself like every month or two to try the thing that you tried a month or two ago and it didn't work, but try it again because it might now. And the reality is you have to keep doing that because at some point it is going to work. And so that's what I think is there's a little bit of like a what does it mean for our strategy, for our competitive strategy and positioning. But I think more so it's kind of what should we be rethinking of our approach, how we're building, what is like working now that when we tried it a couple months ago, it didn't work. But if we don't try it again, we're going to miss out on this huge efficiency. That's what I've found us thinking a lot about. And then to your point, I think it's easy to go down these rabbit holes of, well, is everything just going to get consolidated into a couple big players and or who knows, does it even matter because it's all going to be AI robots in the future and who knows, should we even be building a company, right? There, you can get into these existential kind of spinning moments very easily, but then I think what brings me back down is there is still such a gap between what many of these tools promise and what actually they deliver. And that gap is completely how much you can close that gap is in execution. And so just coming back to how do we execute? How do we pick a very high value problem and use case and nail that? That's what we have as an advantage as a startup is focus and speed running at the thing that we're trying to solve. And so that is kind of what brings me back to feeling grounded is let's execute. Let's go. We know we're going after a big problem. The problem's resonating. Let's just go deliver the absolute best solution we can and not get too spun up about the noise that's happening in the market or the big announcements that came out.
Absolutely. I think honestly, I think that's really the best way you could possibly pursue a business of any kind. Macroeconomics, I think things that are outside of your control. I mean, those all just slightly cause a distraction, and those little distractions disrupt everything. And I think you articulated that very well. I am curious because I know I talked about it. Um, you had a young child. You were pregnant, 7 months fundraising. It's already a strenuous time. I mean, you're also now, uh, carrying another person on board. 7 months. That's a difficult stage. More just of everything on your plate. Does that? I mean, what's the right question here? How much harder is that? And I know you'll probably be like, it's all hard and you'll do. I am curious because I think a lot of people might not have the context. And it's good for people to hear, and especially if you are a potential mother or about to be, and you're thinking I might go down this path. I really am asking because I want others to hear your story and the fact that you obviously push through it.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I actually had a moment, a couple of moments, period of time when because we had been bootstrapping for a bit and we were kind of deciding when do we want to go fundraise. And we got to a point where we felt like it was probably the right time for the company. And if I'm being really honest, I had a little bit of a question for a period of time, which is like, but should I not? Because I'm pregnant. And, the thoughts of like, well, will someone be hesitant about giving us money because they're worried that, I'm going to have a kid and then disappear, or just to be really transparent, right? Those types of thoughts. And there's part of me probably that feels a little embarrassed that I had those thoughts. Like, I'd love to be able to say, like, I didn't think about it. I just, powered through and went for it. But no, I mean, I honestly had conversations like that with friends and family and kind of said, should I wait? How much should I try to hide it? How much should I lead with it? How much should I acknowledge it? Like, I'm going to see people in person in 7 months, they're going to know. And so, like, I guess it's just kind of sharing that there was a bit more of a like handful of additional considerations that were beyond just when is the right time to do this for the company, but also kind of how do I manage this thing that's going to be there. And, ultimately where I got to was I'm not going to let the pregnancy change any of the timing of what's right for the company. And honestly, if it's an issue for a potential investor that I'm pregnant, that's probably not the right investor to work with. And I do think I was a little bit just being very practical and honest about it. I was a little bit lucky that it was my second kid because I think there was a little bit less of a concern of like, are you going to, because before you've had any kids, you don't totally know what it means to be a parent. I've at least had one. And so I think there's a little bit more of you can trust, like, I know what the experience is. I'm going to be able to kind of come back to work relatively quickly and kind of not really miss a lot of stuff while navigating this. So yeah, I mean, I don't have like a perfect answer of I'm not sure that I handled it exactly how you should or shouldn't, but I think maybe what I'm trying to convey in sharing all of this is there's certainly a lot of additional questions and maybe moments of doubt that get layered on when you're in family building mode while also trying to build a company. And my only kind of solution, I guess, was to be honest about, I talked about that kind of stuff with my co-founder. I talked about it with friends and family. I relied on the people in my network to kind of help me figure out and not get so far into second guessing myself that all of a sudden I wasn't fundraising because of it, right? I had people saying to me like, look, if someone doesn't invest because you're pregnant, like, do you really want to work with them? And I was like, you know what, that actually is where I want to land on this. The thing I will joke, maybe just be a little lighthearted about it, uh, probably the thing I didn't anticipate. Sometimes after fundraising, what you want to go do at the end of the day is like have a cocktail or a beer. I didn't quite, I joke with my co-founder, if and when we have to fundraise again, I definitely can't be pregnant because we need to be able to go have a drink at the end of the day. So,
I love that. I love that. You know what? I don't know if there are good answers for everything you just mentioned. I think some of those things are not in the control of the founder. There's some of those are larger macro issues that you had to kind of deal with. But obviously you did it. You made it through. I think it's a great story. Other people can hopefully benefit from that, and hopefully the next time you do fundraise, you can have a beverage of your choice so you can celebrate. Um, One final question, and I am curious because you are in a space that's just rapidly growing. You're in a space that's super dynamic. You're bringing in all this, everything we've discussed. You also have, you know, two children who are younger. How do you balance? How do you take time to make sure you're present where you need to be? Because that's for your family and your business. So it's a little bit, you could. if you're a founder without younger children or whatever the dynamic, you can maybe be just present for the business,
Yeah.
or you work for somebody and you want to be present in both. Being a founder and being a parent, you have to be present in both of those, like a lot of other jobs, but obviously you're responsible for everything with your name on it. So how do you find balance?
Well, this actually is a nice, maybe kind of full circle moment to where we started, which was I think I pull a lot on some of the experience I've had when I was, at my first startup. And I mean, I was kind of like, did a lot of just grind, 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 and probably burned myself out pretty quickly and kind of learned the lesson. And again, there's a lot of cliches of like, it's a marathon, not a sprint, whatever. But I think I truly learned and internalized the lesson that if I didn't, at least to some extent, take care of myself and kind of fill up what I needed or what, family, friends, etc., that was actually going to burn me out and not allow me to show up for work in the way that I wanted to. So I think I pull on that a little bit and am more comfortable saying, yes, there's going to be moments where I'm going to have to weight really heavily in one way or the other. There's going to be moments when we have a big launch coming up where I'm going to have to rely on my village to help me more so that I can give more attention to the business and rely on friends, family, caregivers to help on the kids front. And, vice versa. There might be moments where like my kids really need me. And so I'm going to probably drop the ball at least temporarily on something. So just kind of being more comfortable with like, you can't do something that's like completely unsustainable. You can do something unsustainable for a not sustained period of time, right? By definition, but you can't do that all the time. So you have to, I think that just comes with like experience and knowing your own limits and knowing how to just make the decisions that are going to allow you to show up in the way you want, not just in that moment, but in the months and years to come. I don't think I had the foresight to know how to do that when I was in my 20s. I think now that I'm in my a little later, late late 30s, I know a bit more how to do that, and I think I'm a little more intentional. But the short answer, if I'm being really honest, is like sometimes you also feel like you're kind of dropping the ball in every area, and you got to just give yourself some grace and get a little comfortable with like sometimes 80% needs to be enough.
I love it. I appreciate that. Great conversation. If somebody wants to reach out to you with a question that we haven't covered or a follow-up question, what's a good way of doing that?
LinkedIn is probably the best way. I'm just Berit Hoffmann on LinkedIn, and I think I shared my LinkedIn URL with you. That's probably the best place.
Okay, absolutely. We'll make sure people are aware of that. Barrett, thanks for being on. Thanks for taking the time. I really do appreciate that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This is fun conversation.
Absolutely. All right, that's it for the episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I think Barrett has a great story. Obviously, we started with talking about founding a little bit later in life. She walked us through the decisions and obviously how she kind of carried some of her work history with her and the decisions to start a company. And we talked about fundraising and dealing with some of the challenges or opportunities within that AI space and fundraising, and also being a new mother and an expectant mother and how she went about dealing with that and balancing her current business. And hopefully we all wish her the best, that she will get to raise more money and have that beverage. I'm excited. I'm just kidding. But I really do hope so as well. But please share this episode out. I thought it was really good, and I think the content's great, and I think others should hear the story, and hopefully will inspire. So please do that. Also like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.